Parents chose my brother's fake charity over my surgery fund, then begged for my help. I was 23 when my knee injury happened during a basketball game at the local community center. The pain was immediate and excruciating, like someone had driven a hot poker straight through my joint. The MRI results came back showing torn cartilage and ligament damage that would require surgery to fix properly. Without it, I'd be looking at chronic pain and limited mobility for the rest of my life. The surgery wasn't covered by my basic insurance plan, and the out-of-pocket cost was going to be around $15,000. I had been saving money for months, working double shifts at the warehouse and picking up weekend gigs wherever I could find them. By the time I got the diagnosis, I had managed to scrape together about $8,000, but I was still $7,000 short. My parents had always been the type to help their kids when they were in real trouble. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they had some savings and had always told my brother and me that family comes first. So when I explained my situation to them over dinner one evening, I expected them to at least consider helping me out with a loan or something. Instead, my mother looked uncomfortable, and my father cleared his throat in that way he did when he was about to deliver bad news. They explained that they had already committed their savings to something else, something they described as incredibly important. My brother had apparently approached them a few weeks earlier with what he called a revolutionary business opportunity that was also going to help underprivileged kids. My brother had always been the charming one in the family, the one who could talk his way into or out of anything. He was 2 years older than me and had a way of making even the most ridiculous ideas sound brilliant. This time, he had convinced our parents that he was starting a charitable foundation that would provide sports equipment to inner-city schools while also generating profits for investors. The way he described it to them, it was a win-win situation. They would invest $10,000, get a guaranteed return of $15,000 within 6 months, and help disadvantaged kids at the same time. It sounded too good to be true, but my brother had always been good with numbers and presentations, and he had shown them official-looking documents and projections. I tried to explain to my parents that this sounded like a scam, that legitimate charities don't promise guaranteed returns to investors, and that my brother had never shown any interest in helping kids or running a business before. But they were already convinced, and they seemed almost offended that I was questioning their decision and my brother's integrity. The conversation became heated when I pointed out that my surgery was a medical necessity, not an investment opportunity. My father said that the surgery could wait a few months, that maybe I could find a cheaper option or apply for financial assistance. My mother added that they were thinking about the bigger picture, about how helping my brother's charity would benefit many children, not just one person. I left their house that night feeling more hurt and confused than I had ever felt in my life. My own parents had chosen to gamble their savings on my brother's questionable business venture, instead of helping me get necessary medical treatment. The worst part was that they seemed to genuinely believe they were making the noble choice. Over the next few weeks, I watched my brother post photos on social media of himself at fancy restaurants and wearing expensive clothes. He had moved out of his cramped apartment into a much nicer place, and was driving a car that definitely cost more than any charity organizer should be able to afford. When I questioned him about it, he just smiled and said that successful people need to look successful to attract investors. My knee was getting worse every day. The pain was constant now, and I had to use a cane to get around. Simple tasks like climbing stairs or standing for long periods became nearly impossible. I had to cut back my hours at work, which meant I was making even less money toward the surgery fund. Meanwhile, my parents were becoming increasingly excited about my brother's progress reports. He would visit them weekly with updates about schools he had supposedly contacted and equipment he was planning to purchase. He showed them photos of happy children and talked about the difference they were making in young lives. 3 months after I had first asked for help, I finally managed to get a loan from my credit union for the remaining amount I needed. The interest rate was brutal, but I couldn't wait any longer. I scheduled the surgery for the following month and began preparing for the recovery period. The day before my surgery, my brother called me in a panic. His voice was shaking, and he sounded like he hadn't slept in days. He told me that there had been complications with the charity, that some of the investors had pulled out at the last minute, and that he needed more time to make things right. I asked him directly if he had been lying about the entire operation, and after a long pause, he admitted that there was no charity. He had used the money to pay off gambling debts and support a lifestyle he couldn't afford. He had been planning to use profits from sports betting to pay everyone back, But instead of winning, he had lost even more money. My parents found out the truth when they called the schools my brother had claimed to be helping and discovered that no one had ever heard of him or his foundation. They were devastated not just because they had lost their savings, but because they had chosen to trust him over helping me when I needed them most. The surgery went well and my recovery was faster than expected. I was back to walking normally within 2 months and playing basketball again within 6. But the emotional healing took much longer. I felt betrayed by my entire family, not just my brother for lying, but my parents for choosing his obvious scam over my legitimate medical needs. My parents tried to apologize multiple times, but their words felt hollow. They offered to help me pay back the loan, but by then I had already made arrangements and didn't want to accept anything from them. I needed to prove to myself that I could handle my own problems without relying on people who had already let me down. The real shock came about a year later when my brother was arrested for running multiple investment scams throughout the city. Apparently, my parents weren't his only victims. He had been targeting older people and families, promising them high returns on charitable investments that never existed. The local news covered the story extensively, and my family's name was mentioned in several articles. During the trial, more details came out about the extent of my brother's deception. He had been running these scams for over 2 years, using fake documents, rented office space, and even hiring actors to pose as children who had supposedly benefited from his charity. The amount of money he had stolen from various victims totaled over $200,000. My parents were called as witnesses in the trial, and they had to publicly testify about how they had been deceived by their own son. The shame and embarrassment were overwhelming for them, especially when they had to explain in court why they had chosen to invest in his fake charity instead of helping with my medical expenses. The media attention was brutal for our family. Neighbors and coworkers saw the news coverage, and everywhere my parents went, people recognized them as the couple who had fallen for their son's charity scam. They stopped going to their usual grocery store and restaurant because they couldn't handle the stares and whispered conversations. My brother was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all his victims. Of course, he had no assets left to pay anyone back, so the court order was essentially meaningless. My parents lost their $10,000 permanently, along with their faith in their own judgment and their relationship with their older son. About 6 months after the sentencing, my father had a heart attack. It wasn't directly related to the stress of the trial, but I couldn't help wondering if the shame and guilt had contributed to his poor health. He survived, but the medical bills and his inability to work for several months put my parents in serious financial trouble. They had to sell their house and move into a small apartment across town. My mother, who had never worked outside the home, had to find a job at a department store to help pay their bills. They went from being comfortable middle-class retirees to struggling to make ends meet, all because they had trusted the wrong son. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were now in the same position I had been in when I needed surgery money. They needed help and they had nowhere else to turn. My father swallowed his pride and called me one evening to ask if I could loan them some money to help with his medical bills. I had mixed feelings about their request. Part of me wanted to say no, to let them experience the same rejection I had felt when I asked for help. But another part of me knew that holding grudges would only make everyone more miserable. They were still my parents, despite their poor judgment, and they were genuinely suffering for their mistake. I decided to help them, but I set clear conditions. I would pay my father's medical bills directly to the hospital, but I wouldn't give them cash that could be misused again. I also insisted that they attend financial counseling sessions to learn better money management skills and avoid being scammed in the future. The financial counseling sessions were eye-opening for all of us. My parents learned about common scam tactics and how to identify red flags in investment opportunities. They also had to confront their own biases and admit that they had been more willing to believe my brother's lies than to trust my honest assessment of the situation. Through the counseling process, we were able to have more honest conversations about what had happened and why. My parents acknowledged that they had failed me when I needed them most, and they seemed to genuinely understand the emotional damage their decision had caused. They couldn't undo what they had done, but they could at least take responsibility for it. My brother wrote letters from prison asking for forgiveness and promising to pay everyone back when he got out. I never responded to his letters, and I told my parents I wasn't interested in having any relationship with him after his release. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, and stealing from elderly people and families while pretending to help children was something I couldn't get past. The experience changed my relationship with my parents permanently. We gradually rebuilt some level of trust and communication, but it was never the same as it had been before. I helped them when they needed it because it was the right thing to do, not because I felt obligated as their son. Looking back, I realized that my brother's scam revealed something important about all of us. It showed that my parents were capable of making selfish decisions while convincing themselves they were being generous. It showed that my brother was willing to destroy his own family for money. And it showed that I was stronger than I had thought, capable of handling major problems on my own when necessary. The surgery scar on my knee serves as a daily reminder of that difficult period in my life. But instead of remembering it as a time when my family failed me, I try to think of it as the time when I learned to rely on myself and discovered that I could overcome obstacles even when the people closest to me let me down. My parents are doing better now financially, though they'll never fully recover from the money they lost. They've learned to be more cautious with their savings and more skeptical of get-rich-quick schemes. Most importantly, they've learned that family loyalty means supporting each other through real problems, not chasing dreams that sound too good to be true. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest. But it also taught me that you can survive that hurt and come out stronger on the other side. My knee is completely healed now, and so is most of the emotional damage, though some scars will always remain.